Welcome to the 1 Minute Apologist. We interview the world's leading apologists to provide credible answers to curious questions.
Simon, how do we prepare for spiritual warfare?
That's a very important question. I think that to begin with, we need to understand who our chief enemy is. And the New Testament is pretty explicit. In Ephesians chapter 6, the very well-known verse on the spiritual armor, preparing ourselves for battle, we find verse 12, which I think is sometimes passed over too quickly by a lot of preachers. That particular verse, according to a lot of good biblical scholars, nowhere is there any indication of human agency. So I take it that this is another kind of agency, and the only other beings that exist are between us and God are these demonic beings. And so our chief enemy is Satan, and so we need to understand how he engages in warfare in order to prepare ourselves. Now, in my studies on the subject, I found that spiritual warfare, for the most part, is not a battle of power. It's a battle of truth. And that's extremely significant, because if we are to prepare ourselves for spiritual warfare, then we need to understand how to handle truth. And interestingly enough, the object of our being that deals with truth is our intellect. And if we have feeble minds and we cannot think well, then not only are we going to be unable to communicate truth, because we can't even tell people, give them a definition of truth, we're actually not going to be very effective in spiritual warfare. Because spiritual warfare, for the most part, is an ideological battle. The conversations you have with your neighbor who's a skeptic, or your friend who is now following a cult or believing something else, that conversation is very much a part of spiritual warfare. And I don't think the Bible leaves us languishing on the nature of this warfare. I think there's other passages which get down to the heart of the nature of the battle and how we can prepare ourselves. 2 Corinthians 10:5, which is a verse which is quite unpopular, I think, in the church today, because it talks about argumentation. And a lot of people think that you don't love people if you argue with them. Well, they confuse arguments that are meaningless with arguments that are worthwhile. The text is very clear that we don't wage war as the world does, but that we take captive ideas and make them subject to those of Christ. This is a key part of the battle that goes on, and unless we are able to think well and engage with ideas and show how those ideas are false, we are unfortunately not going to be effective in our efforts in spiritual warfare.